It's great to see all of you here. This is a collaboration between the Health Library Group and EARLL, the Early Career Academic and Research Librarians in London. We've been working together to come up with this session on how to apply to jobs. I'm currently going through the application process and have been working with my colleagues. We're gonna deliver this session today. There's a lot of good stuff in store. With that, I'm gonna hand over to William, who's going to talk a bit about what we're going to do exactly, and he's going to introduce everyone.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Alyssa. So yeah, obviously, Alyssa's been working with us to help produce this session. So and we'll hear a bit more about that in a moment. I'm just gonna say we're going to use Menti for a few questions to get some feedback from the audience. So I'm just going to introduce that now by sharing my screen. We want to know, what do you think is important in a good job application? And if you haven't used Menti before, then effectively you just need to go to menti.com and use the code 71485350. Or you can click the link in the chat, which I am going to repost for everyone who hasn't been in so far. So yeah, if you just either click on the link or go into Menti, we want to know, what do you think is important in a good job application? And the other thing that you can do in Menti once you've logged in is we will be using it as a Q&A tool. So if you have your Menti like this, obviously we're asking this question at the moment. This will be what it looks like on your phone. Hopefully you can see that. And then there's the button here to ask questions. And if you click on ask a new question, then you can ask a question and everyone else will be able to pick those questions up and answer those at the end. So yeah, that's the question functionality within Menti. So while those are coming in, keep thinking about those questions. What we're going to do while you're thinking about what you think is important in a good job application is we're going to just introduce the speakers. So I've got Alyssa, Hongan, Hannah, and myself here. So perhaps if I go first, we're just going to introduce ourselves and our kind of background and how we came to be in our current roles, all that kind of stuff. So I'm William Henderson. I started as a children's librarian in public libraries. So for around 5 years, I was a children's librarian in Wiltshire. And after they made everyone redundant in public libraries, I came over to health, where I was a librarian in the NHS in Bedfordshire. And I went on to become a manager there. And when I got tired of that, I came to UCL. So I have applied for jobs now in 3 sectors. And I've also been in the shortlisting panel and interview panel for all 3 sectors: public, NHS, and academia. So I'm hoping that will help me provide some insight into the process for all the 3 different kinds of professions. So Hongan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Hongan Wing. I'm the library service manager at the King's Fund Library, which is a small specialist research library that focuses on health and social care policy. I've been at the fund for a while, so I've done kind of like 3 jobs within the service over the past 13 years. So I started out as an information specialist in the service. And before that, I've worked in kind of various sectors. So I've worked in school libraries, school library services, and also public libraries as well, is where I also got my start. But yeah, this was kind of since I qualified, basically all my experience has been in the health library sector. And I'll pass over to Alyssa.
Yeah, thank you, Hong-An. So I'm currently completing my master's in library and information science. I'd previously worked at universities and research and teaching roles, and I'm now currently crossing over into librarianship, which is probably quite a common path for a lot of us. Yeah, I currently work at the Warburg Library, and I'm looking for my first professional library job. So yeah, I'm right in there with all of you. I'll hand over to Hannah.
Well, I'm another person who started off in public libraries. I don't think we haven't had this discussion yet. I didn't know there were so many of us. And yeah, like William, I found that there sadly isn't much of a future in that anymore. So I went off and did my MA in Library and Information Studies at UCL. And while I was doing that, I worked evenings and weekends at City University, which was the first university library job I was successful in getting. And this was, while I was working in public libraries, I went through at least like a year of unsuccessul applications and interviews. So for those of you who are kind of stuck in that rut at the moment, I totally feel where you're coming from. So then once I'd completed my MA at UCL, I then went full-time at City, working during the daytime, which was lovely, during daylight hours, working within their copyright and e-resources team. From there, I moved on to LSE as a senior library assistant. I did that for a couple of years, and then I got my first professional post within the research support team at LSE as research data librarian, and that is what I'm still doing now.
Perfect. Thanks so much. So before we move on to the next bit, I just wanted to pull out some of these and thanks for contributing to this. This is some excellent bits for our what's important. So yeah, I really like this one. Don't just demonstrate past skills and achievements. Show enthusiasm for the job you're applying for, what you're going to contribute, and what do you want that? Why do you want that specific role in that organization? That's an excellent point. And I also liked, lost it now, this one. Obviously, I'm sure you answer all the components of the job description, but the try to make your answers stand out from the crowd and make your application interesting. And definitely, as someone who's shortlisted recently over 100 applications, that are anonymous, having that thing that makes the job interesting or the application interesting, and making you stand out so you're not just a number. I think that's a really, really, really excellent tip. And obviously all these answers are great, but yeah, this one also is quite good. So personalize your application to the specific job you're applying for, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in a bit. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to hand over to Hannah and Hong-An for the next little bit.
Thank you. So hopefully you all got the documents in advance. Give us a shout in chat if you didn't. So the next part is going to be kind of like a little bit of a chance for you to participate in a very kind of quick mock shortlisting exercise. So we sent out a job description and 2 supporting statements for the EARLL University, a fine, upstanding institution. So we're going to put you into groups, and it would be great if you could have a chat about, you know, the applications, what ones you kind of, if you were in the position of a shortlister, which ones you would prefer and which ones you would go for.
There we go. I was looking more at between the two supporting statements, and I was actually proofreading one for my friend over the weekend. So I've done something similar, because he's looking for a graduate job at the moment. And it's quite interesting to me how they are both very similar in terms of they're both qualified enough for the job, but it's how they're trying to sell themselves. And the supporting statement 2 has got more specific examples, whereas in the supporting statement 1, it's more waffly and like, oh yeah, I'm qualified, I can do this, but it's not displaying it, it's more telling you.
Yeah, that's definitely like that's definitely something I think that is something to think about, especially in kind of our experience as shortlisters. There is something about like, what evidence are you kind of providing us with? And so I think you've hit on something really, really interesting and crucial there. Catherine, how about you?
Yeah, I was just going to say that they don't really talk themselves up in the first. They say, I haven't had much experience working in libraries, but they need to sort of say, I've worked in public library, I've worked in a school library, I've worked you know, in SOAS, an academic library. They have worked there, but they kind of make the statement, first of all, I don't really have much experience, which I don't think is a good thing to say. And also I think the fact that they emphasize they love reading, I think probably most people who work in libraries do love reading, but you don't sit there all day, you know, reading, do you? You might, most people don't even touch a book. Maybe in public libraries, you need to be able to recommend things, but I just think that that's someone who perhaps doesn't know much about libraries thinks, oh yeah, that's a really important thing to say, but I think it's probably something that makes you think, oh dear, I'll put that one to, you know, I'll not look at that one.
Big red flag. Big red
Yeah.
flag.
Because sorry, go on.
apart from anything, it sort of shows that you don't understand the role. So yeah.
Hannah, did you put that in purposefully?
Yeah, I did put it in purposely. It's, you actually see it a lot.
Yeah.
And I have seen it in segments before where people are quite qualified, you know, they do have academic library experience. There's, you know, this is the same applicant. I think that was obvious, but the statement written in different ways. But yeah, it is kind of a red flag. I know it sounds very harsh, and I know it's said with the best of intentions, but to me it always rings of those people who used to go up to me when I worked at a public library and say, I'd love to do your job because you just get to read books all day. When, you know, unfortunately working full-time in a library does really cut down on the amount of reading time that I have in a week. So yeah, it's one of those plus, you know, a lot of modern library jobs, I never deal with books in my job. Books don't exist in my job. I'm not saying they're not important, but you know, they have like nothing to do with anything that I do. So it does, yeah, you know, as you say, it does show like a lack of knowledge about the sector and the priorities of the sector. So I know it's said with the best of intentions, and it's quite sort of a sweet thing to say, but it does kind of mark the application as a bit amateurish, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like you know, I work in a kind of library where the majority of the material is electronic, for example. So my contact with books is incredibly limited. So yeah, again, like for me, when I've seen that in applications, I've thought, you know, I'm because of the specialist nature of my library, I kind of understand that people might not necessarily clock that, but also there is something about kind of like, I do want people to kind of have at least a realistic sense of what the role entails. So even if you don't know that we don't deal with physical collections that much, yeah, there is very little reading time on the job. Emma, you've had your hand up. Let's hear what you think.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfectly.
Oh, great, perfectly. So yeah, I noticed that they had the same background qualifications but felt quite different in their statements. But even with the second supporting statement, I think that they could have they've made a good attempt at matching their skills and experience to the job description, but they haven't really brought things forward. They haven't really said, I want to do this in your organization. I want to make this, I want to take what I've learned and develop it and extend it and that kind of thing. I did think the examples that they gave could have been a bit stronger. So the initiative one about seeing books misplaced around the library and always make sure to reshelve them, that's a diligence thing. I think if you're showing initiative, you're going sort of a bit above and beyond. And if people kind of maybe kind of a bit more reflective and maybe make notes about things that they've really enjoyed, they've probably then got a bit of a reservoir, because you can never think, can you? You can never think at the time, oh yeah, I did something, it was really great. What was it again? So I think to prepare for maybe using this application as a platform for then going on to have an interview, obviously you want to put your strongest arguments out there first, but then to really build on that and show that you do think about your job, you do take pride and joy in it. And also just seeing what the users get out of it. It's very like, well, I do this job and I enjoy it, but in terms of why is this job important to end users? What difference do I make to somebody's day if I get them the information they need? Just felt they could have expanded on that a bit more, and it would have really then jumped off the page.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I really like that point that you made as well about like the growth aspect, which is that kind of reflective piece that you refer to, like demonstrating that understanding of where they want to develop, how they want to develop, and being able to connect that to this specific opportunity. It just shows like a level of like thought that is quite nice. So yeah, I do agree.
It's a difficulty, I think, if you do match a lot of a job's requirements. If you're saying, I've already done this, I've already done this, I've already done this, it begs the question of, well, why do you want to work here then? What do you want to apply it somewhere new? Are you exploring a new sector? Where are you? Yeah, tell us something. You can show a lot of your personality and development that way.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting one, because I think, again, I agree, but I also think this depends. So I think it depends on the role, and I'd be interested to hear what my fellow panelists think. But if it's the kind of, say if this was like a temporary role for like a year fixed term contract that was like backfill for something, I'd want someone who can like come in and just kind of like be able to do everything straight away. But if it was a permanent role, I'd seen a lot of turnover in the team. I want people to grow in the role, and kind of be around for a while. Then demonstrating that growth potential and that kind of reflection on it might kind of come up higher in my list of priorities. But yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think it depends on, I think it depends on the team. I think there's some areas that are kind of more future facing than others, if it's okay to say that. Like I know in my own team, because I work in research support. So I work in advising on research data. I work in like open access. Things change all the time. We get new policies, new guidance, just different like technological developments across the sector. So if you were recruiting, even for like a library assistant role in those teams, somebody who is very interested in CPD, somebody who is very switched on to the world of libraries and who you think probably does want to advance, would kind of be an essential. Obviously, that's lovely in all teams. I think that's what we all ideally want. But there are probably other areas where you might think, this person has a hell of a lot of experience. We want somebody to come in like on the ground and be able to just kind of deliver that service, someone who we can have faith in. So yeah, I mean, I think it does depend on, it depends on what you're recruiting for, really. But at an absolute minimum, we are always looking for matching the person spec. I think quite a few people have said that. So if you match the person spec, you've got a very good chance of an interview at LSE, certainly.
I'll only add that obviously I'm sure a lot of you are aware it's a matrix system in the NHS and in the UCL, and it's difficult to look outside that when you're thinking about the regulations that are in place with regards to recruiting. So there isn't really it isn't possible to be overqualified for a role, if that makes sense. once you've demonstrated that you can do XYZ, then you're ticking the box essentially, and that will add up to your score. So I would never be afraid to talk about all your experiences and everything. What you should be aware of, though, is if in the person spec there is room for elaboration. So if they say commitment to CPD, for example, then obviously there is room there for you to really elaborate and add some extra detail other than just I've chartered and I go to conferences, etc., etc. So it's important to add where you can, but ultimately don't be afraid to if you are going for a role which you've done before or anything like that. Obviously, as Emma says, it's important to add context to why you're making that decision, but that would probably come up at the interview. So at the application stage, it's important to just really demonstrate how you can meet as many of the criteria as possible, because we are doing it anonymously and we are reading them and we are checking across a matrix which basically says, do you have this? Yes, no. And so really it's impossible at quite early stage to get to know the applicants, if you like. So yeah, I just can't emphasize enough that if you have a varied and wide experience, that is a positive, and to make sure that you include it.
I think so I think we're getting into kind of like the nuance of like some of the things that go on behind the scenes in shortlisting. And I feel like people might be sitting there and thinking like, oh, how can you know what's going on in shortlisters' minds? So I think there's an important thing to say here, is that like this session is kind of about kind of like some of the definite things that you can do, which will like definitely improve your application, and like things that like across the board people will be looking for. But then there is stuff that like goes on behind the scenes, because I don't think there's like a surefire bulletproof way to say this is absolutely how you will get shortlisted. But I think there's some stuff where it's like, yeah, this will kind of absolutely amp up your chances of getting shortlisted, but also giving you kind of like, I guess, a peek behind the scenes of like that, like what goes on behind the curtain of shortlisting and what are the other things that come up behind the scenes. Zaman, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, so please do let me know how we pronounce your name.
Hi.
Lippy. Lippy,
Yeah.
Lippy. Hi, Lippy. You're
Hi,
right.
Hi, William. Yes, William and I are, we know each other very well. Yes, and yes, is my surname's come up. Basically, there's a couple of things I just wanted to say as a shortlister, as well as someone who has applied for posts. One is, looking at the statements, they're talking about their qualifications. Generally, I when I see that, I think they've already put that. I've already seen they're qualified. It's more about how to sell yourself. It's, I'm sure colleagues would agree, it's about selling yourself as to what attributes you have in order to fulfill the job role. But in the process, we recruited a few months ago, and obviously I've got someone already in place, but I remember the process. Some people were putting like, pages of information, and there were some just like a couple of sentences. And I thought, in this day and age, it's about selling yourself. And I was just really surprised about how they expected me to recruit and to shortlist them in the process of if they've literally put a couple of sentences, because I can't decipher what they're trying to, how they're trying to sell themselves. And I'm just thinking, they just probably did it on the cuff. And it's really hard on that occasion. I just think I found that quite difficult, because obviously I had quite a lot of response. It was and the ones obviously that I went through the interview process was because one or two, even in the interview process, they did not have a lot, and I was struggling because they had the qualification, and it can be really hard. It's like we have to mind read what they're trying to say. So on that note, yes, definitely people need to say more. But I recently did apply for a post that I really, really thought I'd be interested in. And I got some great feedback from them, only because I was a bit surprised that I wasn't, shortlisted. And I asked for feedback and they provided excellent feedback for me. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, they want me to write a dissertation. And that's how it felt like. I don't know what other colleagues think. So I just feel like even if you do have the experience and you have the knowledge and what do you need to do to get that interview? Say I've been settled in my post. I just fancied it because I just thought it looked really interesting. So yeah, question out there to colleagues.
Yeah, I think you do need, well, it's not just a question of quantity, but it's a question of quality, isn't it? You need to obviously not just say a lot, but say the right thing. And just in terms of the point of for example, when we look at these two supporting statements, obviously they're saying, so they've worked in public libraries. This is from supporting statement 2, currently working as an evening and weekend assistant. That's great. That would get you sort of like half marks, if you like. But the next bit where they say, I have experience of frontline services in a busy environment. I also have previous customer service experience at bars and restaurants. That might push you a bit further. And then to improve it a bit more, you might say what working in frontline services and in a busy environment, what that actually means. So you would go on to say something like, so I'm able to deal with, customer complaints and, I'm able to, prioritize things and things like that. So do you see how it kind of, there's like stages that you need to go through, and there's, as a shortlister, you're having like almost like a traffic light that this is a no, this is no, this is a maybe, this is a green, they can do it. So hopefully that kind of adds to that. I don't know if anyone else wants to come in.
Yeah, I had. Oh, you go for it, Hannah.
Okay. Just I think layout is important, and neither of these statements is actually like that good. I know one of them is heaps better than the other. 2 is obviously better than 1, but I didn't want to have like an example statement and then like a really obviously bad statement. Because if you think about it from the point of view of the recruiter, a few of us have mentioned you might get like over 100 applications for a job. I've looked at jobs before, we've had over 100 applications. I think especially for a lot of the really big universities, that is probably going to be standard for a lot of these roles. One thing I should mention is we say this, an awful lot of those applications, about a third are probably like actually serious. We get a lot of off the cuff kind of applications as well. So don't let that intimidate you. But I've gone into, the recruitment system and I'm opening application after application after application. I've got the person spec next to me and I'm literally going, does this match this? Does this match this? Does this match this? And, I think Jonathan said that at the start, he would start off with the essential criteria, and that's absolutely correct. But if you only show you meet the essential criteria, you might not necessarily get a job interview depending on who else has applied. So if there's others who have been able to demonstrate they meet desirable, and you don't want to do like too many interviews, so there's maybe 6 or 7 spots depending on that might then see you knocked off. So I always say use the headings from the person spec, not necessarily the education one, because as you say, that was mentioned, that's going to have been elsewhere in the application. But make it a little bit easier on the recruiter. I know that nobody really likes the recruiter. They don't necessarily feel sorry for us, and I don't blame you. But just if you really want to make your application stand out and you want to be guaranteed that interview, I think that's the quickest way to do it, is just to be like in order of the criteria in the person spec, because that's another thing I did in the second statement is they kind of had demonstrated more or less roughly that they could sort of meet each category, but I sort of mixed them around. So I would say in order, have the category heading and tell us, this is how I meet it. This is an example of my previous experience. Yeah. So for me, that's how you.
Yeah. For each criteria in the job application, essential, desirable, in the order that it's presented, And then for each one, a star. I don't know if you know this reflection model. So it's situation, task, action, result. So for each of those, present a situation, then the task that you had to do, what you did, and then the result, the reflection on it. If you do that for each, then we're given a full picture of your understanding of that essential criteria. So you've done it before, how you did it before, what how you felt after doing it, and how you would improve, this kind of level of detail. And that doesn't have to be paragraphs and paragraphs. That just has to be one small sentence on each one, and it just makes our lives a whole lot easier.
I'm looking in the chat, and I've noticed a couple of people have made some comments around proofreading and spelling errors and stuff like that. A couple of people picked up on the fact that supporting statement 2 seems to have been proofread, whereas supporting statement 1 was not. How important is this to you as shortlisters?
I mean, it's hugely important, I think. Usually on most job specs or most person specs, there is a communication kind of category. And, you can write in your supporting statement about all the ways you meet that. But if it's littered with grammatical mistakes, if it's littered with spelling errors, you are showing that you don't probably meet the minimum standards for communication. I do have sympathy for people. I think it can be very difficult. People have all kinds of people can have like conditions that can make it more difficult to get things like spelling and grammar right. But I would say that there is software available now. It's pretty easy now to get a spell check or a grammar check on a statement. So yeah, I do think it is hugely important. And also, in the area that I work in research support, you're communicating with academics a lot. And I think academics are themselves often very good communicators, and they will expect the same standard of the library. So yeah, I mean, I do know that this is upsetting for some people, but I do also think it's one of those things that can't be changed. I do think it's important. Yeah.
I can only just second that and just say, it is important to check your spelling and grammar. I just think that it does show sort of a lack of attention if you don't but that is to say, just a counterpoint, that it doesn't need to be an essay. It just needs to be correct.
No, I think there's an interesting thing here, because quite often, as you say, Hannah, communication skills are quite often like a key skill that is on a person's spec. And I think, thinking about like what you're kind of really looking for, I think sometimes job descriptions or person specs can be kind of a bit unclear or quite broad about what they're looking for in communication skills. But I would say, at the heart of it, good communication skills are about being able to kind of convey your point clearly and, succinctly in this case. Because if you think of a shortlister who's got multiple applications to go through, sometimes in the hundreds, but even if it's, 30 or 40, that's still a substantial amount to look at. So there is something about like communication skills not necessarily being about sort of like necessarily like the flow of a statement, for example. So I don't know how everyone kind of looked at the statements when they kind of were assessing them, but because quite often if you've got a matrix system or a scoring system as a shortlister, what you're doing is going, do they meet this criteria? And then you whiz through the statement, you're like, yeah, okay, bang on, they've evidenced it. So actually you read it once through maybe to kind of get a sense, and then you go through and cherry pick out the stuff and see whether they've mentioned these things or not. So I don't know how people will feel about this, but I have received applications where like the statement is bullet pointed, and I'm absolutely fine with that. Whereas previous, like before being on a shortlisting panel, I would have been like, you know, is the flow nice? Is the prose good? And actually, I realize now that that is kind of not all that important. So yeah, there is absolutely something about thinking through like what you think good communication means, but also what your communication skills like demonstrates in a soft way about you. So you know, for me, if I'm looking for a cataloger and their statement has errors in it, then it tells me something about their like attention to detail, or their eye for detail in the candidate. Yeah. So, and I think a couple of people mentioned before things like getting other people to like read your application as well. Yeah, or using kind of like the wide variety of tools out there. This is one of those places where like spending that time on this kind of thing is really, really helpful. Agnes, let's come to you.
Hi, hello, it's Agnes. I'm from central government, from civil service, so I have a little bit different approach to the recruiting. And as we are talking about communication skills, if this point appears on any requirement, what we look for is something a little bit different. It's not only establishing how well you can communicate, how correctly, and spelling, grammar, and how your application is phrased, but this is about getting message across. And in civil service, we are looking to recognize people who know not only how to pass information, but to how get message across to someone. And this is connected to communicating in different way to different groups of stakeholders. And very often it's not very clear from the requirements in the job description that they need address exactly this point. So I always ask our HR to be more specific, to add a few extra points, because this is absolutely important if someone applying for any kind of job where communication skills are mentioned would be able to address this point, that they have managed to communicate to different stakeholder groups. In our instance, it will be patient groups, industry, pharma companies, but also internal stakeholders, lower than you, higher than you, so communicating upwards, downwards, and you need to address how will you tailor the same message to different groups. That's, I think, the key point, at least in civil service, that you know how to get message across, not only pass information.
Thank you. A really useful insight into that kind of, yeah, what you're looking for in that particular sector. And yeah, you've also picked up on something, which is, you know, you said something about kind of speaking to HR about making it more specific, which is, yeah, you know, sometimes sometimes systems or processes or job applications aren't always kind of designed in the best way to kind of enable you to give the best application you can. But that's, yeah, that's something that we are kind of that's the responsibility of the recruiting manager really, and the organization. But yes, I think there is something about thinking about like in the round, if that kind of thing comes up in job descriptions or you know, in something around the role, then it's something to think about how you demonstrate that in your application. Nicola, you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, sorry. It's more of a question, I suppose, really, because for me, when the last time I was applying for jobs was literally a couple of months ago before I got my current role, which is my first job, like proper job out of uni. I say that in inverted commas. And I suppose thinking now in terms of obviously post-COVID, we're in definitely a remote working world. And for me, I haven't worked in a busy office environment. So in terms of as recruiters, when it comes to looking at graduate applications or when people who've had limited experience in terms of in physical offices, would it be a case of trying to display that you are able to reach out to people as needed? Would it be a case of what skills would you say you need for a busy office environment that you would be able to present on your application? Because now we work in a remote or hybrid world. So I think that would be my question.
So it doesn't matter if your office is physical or virtual, the same skills, you're going to need to have the same skills. So focus on those skills that you're using in that busy office environment. So, you know, you are, that you're, you know, you're available, you're contactable, you are good at prioritizing different tasks. You're a good interpersonal communicator. Does that kind of make sense? Is that the same
that makes sense.
principles will apply, I would say. And never say, oh, I haven't worked in an office. Just don't mention it.
Yeah.
Just say,
Thank you.
yeah, always keep, just like when we're literature searching, always keep it positive. So don't ever say not, okay? It's always got to be, you know, I do this, I can do this, I can do this. And don't say, oh, I don't work in an office. Because that's also, you know, I don't know, but I don't know, Hong An, if you have anything
That, yeah, I would tend to agree. I would also say that I can understand your anxiety about it, but also, you know, we're going to have like a whole generation of new professionals who have grown into their career in that same scenario because you've started your career during the pandemic. And even if you haven't, you know, the hybrid working has changed the work environment so much that, you know, it's changing for everyone's getting used to it, and everyone is still kind of figuring out how to work in that environment. So I would say I understand the anxiety, but I can't see it being something that particularly comes up at application stage. I can imagine it maybe coming up at interview, but I agree. I think it's really about the skills and how you apply them rather than your experience of a particular environment. You know, everyone has to start somewhere, and if you've never worked in a busy office environment before, it feels incredibly unfair to be discounted for that because there's a first time for everything.
Thank you.
Hannah, Alyssa, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I don't think so. I don't think it would be a problem for us. The only way I can see it being a problem is if you're actually applying for a role that is very like on campus, and but I feel like if that's not your preference of the way to work, you wouldn't be applying for those roles. Yeah, no, I don't think it wouldn't particularly stand out to me as an issue. I mean, I spend 3 days at home every week, so you know, I get as much work done there as I do in the office, sometimes more actually. So yeah, it wouldn't be a problem.
Thank you. I can see someone's said in the Menti Q&A statement rather than a question. I think this is a good point. So when applying for NHS library jobs, there's a limit on words. I don't think this is just limited to NHS as well. I've kind of experienced application systems where you have like a character limit on the statement, which can be frustrating because, you know, you're like, okay, I've got like a very limited amount of space to sell myself in. So it's difficult to sell yourself in detail. Do we as a panel have any thoughts, any tips, any advice on being able to kind of sell yourself within a character limit?
cut out everything that doesn't directly address what, you know. So obviously it's difficult to talk generally, but you know, you know, less is more, and I think you just need to there was a question actually earlier about should you kind of like put the heading of the experience or whatever, and yes, that is nice if you can sort of wear that in, so you can say having worked in a frontline library position, whatever. That is nice to do that, but if you have only a limited amount of time to explain, just don't include that, and instead just say, I work here, I do this, I can do this, I will do this, and just go really direct with it. Because remember as well, we're reading through we're skimming through all of these, so that's why there is a word count. And yeah, that's all I can say. It's difficult to give a concrete example. And yeah, that's a really good point by Emma, is that the supporting statement is how you meet the person spec. We can also draw from, well, at UCL at least, and in the NHS, we can draw from your previous experience and your employment history. So take advantage of that. If you're just regurgitating what's in the employment history section in the supporting bit, that's not adding anything. So, make sure you refer back to the employment history section saying, my work at X, and I could do this, because I worked at this, and we can refer back to that section. So use that as an extra bit of word count.
Thanks. That's a really good point. Yeah, I think there's no shame in being quite direct and utilitarian about it, and just if you have got limited time and space, just address the thing that they're asking for. Yeah, and make sure that you make it clear that you have that experience, those skills, and back it up. Hannah and Alyssa, any thoughts on you from limited characters or space to demonstrate something?
I don't think it's common in universities because it's not something I've encountered before. Or at least it would be a very, very generous character limit. I mean, if they put the character limit in, they obviously don't want the kind of the detail that we've been talking about. So I would just, I think that's all you can do really, is just do what the other guys have advised, because I mean, clearly that's what they want. They want the brief for application. So
yeah.
Well, maybe also I definitely see it as an opportunity for you as well. I guess the longer the application is, the more time it takes on your plate. So if you only have 150 words for one of the questions, for example, that will save you quite a lot of time. That being said, I have encountered quite a few forms where they didn't put the word count and then there's a word count. So yeah.
That's always the worst. It's so frustrating.
When we think about statement 2, right, we've got this last paragraph here, which is talking about initiative. So it says, I frequently use my own initiative in my work, for example, in my current role at SOAS, blah, 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 right? So it's straightforward. I use my own initiative at SOAS, or at my current role at SOAS, by completing walkarounds, to keep an eye on students, using a roving customer, as a roving customer service point, when I noticed increasing noise as a result of verbal complaints from users, I referred this to the user services manager and created instructions. So you can take a lot of words out of that last paragraph. You could probably half it. And also, while we're on the conversation of all this new ways of working and everything, use AI to shorten your applications. Put your application into ChatGPT and ask it to shorten it, and it will be able to do that for you. It will still be your words that you've put in there, and obviously you can still edit it as it comes out, but take advantage of these tools that are available, and they're now available within Microsoft Word as well. So why not?
That is a great tip, and an actual practical use of ChatGPT rather than asking it to write imaginary film synopsises, which is what I use it for. Agnes, let's come to you. Agnes, are you still there?
Oh, hi. Yes, I'm still here.
Hi.
Just to mention, if you have, we have the limit of words in civil service applications, and it's there for a reason. These limits, first of all, because we simply having few hundred applications don't have the time to read through long applications, and secondly, it's also to show for the applicant, it's opportunity. It's for us like additional criteria. If having limited space, you are able to pull out the most relevant example, the most important bullet points. If you can really extract what's the most important about you. This is a kind of additional skill you need to have if you are presenting yourself, to choose really what's the best, what's the most important. Always put yourself in the recruiter shoes and think what they really would like to find out about you, what you have very limited space, so really use words wisely and use only the best examples. And regarding the previous question, how freshly graduate can apply for anything not having an experience, I believe that they are, well, graduated at least, I don't know, around 19, 20 years old. So they are not, they don't, people without experience do not exist. If you don't have work experience, you have other experience. If it's not volunteering, there is other work you've done, or even your assignments and the uni, how you approach them, how you prepared your work, how you prepared for your dissertation, your master's, whatever you were doing, what techniques you use to disseminate information, to prepare research, to do reports. These are the skills you can put in there even if you don't have proper work experience. And they are definitely skills you can use, you can show there. So just try to find examples, if not from work, then from your life and other activities you are doing. I had a fantastic application recently for a person who was graduate and didn't have any work before, but he was a coach. He was training young people, and he had a lot of experience in managing the group of teenagers, teaching them and training them on the field. So he could use all these skills in his application. So be creative and use your other skills, not work related, because they do count as well.
Thank you, Agnes. I think your mic is a little quiet. There's someone who mentioned that they couldn't hear you. But so to recap, if you couldn't hear Agnes, she made the very good point that you should draw from all of your experience in your application. So not only your work experience, but also any kind of experience you have in your educational life. If you do any volunteering, anything like that, that is all stuff that you can use to evidence your skills. I was really back that up. So I run a graduate trainee scheme at the fund. So quite often, you know, I see a lot of applicants who are kind of fresh out of university and this is kind of their first job. And the best applicants are the ones that kind of draw most fully from those things. So if you talk about collaboration, you know, you talk about the group activities you did on your like degree, for example, or even things like, you know, if you're involved in like stuff like societies or like student union stuff, you know, there's kind of rich experience and skills that you would have used and developed there. So yeah, definitely don't discount that stuff. That is all completely valid.
I'm just going to answer this one from the men. Oh, that was loud. I'm just going to answer this one from the mentee. It's would you start a supporting statement with why you've applied? You mentioned addressing each point on the person's specification in order. So this obviously depends on where you're applying and who you are and everything like that. But I would say you should only you should always say why you want to work there throughout the application. But if you want to start your supporting statement with why you've applied because you've got enough word count, etc., I would only do that if you haven't you should be putting it throughout the application. So for each, or for as many elements as you can, you want to say, you know, for example, if you're working in a front line, if the application calls for working on the front line, you have some experience of it. You want to say that you want to get more experience in a bigger organization and have more interactions with customers. So that's why you want to work there. That would be better than putting it at the beginning saying, I'm looking for a new role, you know, in London or whatever. It would be better to mix that in throughout the application. But it might still be sensible to include it if you're applying for a job which is very different or perhaps more junior than a previous role that you've had, to allow them to give context to the decision that you're making. For example, you might have had children or something, and you might want to move to a part-time role or something like that. Then that might be worth adding in, but otherwise I would keep it as just adding it to the different sections. So hopefully whoever answered that. What about why you want to work for a specific organization? Absolutely. If you want to work for the King's Fund and it's all you've ever wanted to do, just say it. Just say it, that you care about health inequalities and you want to make the world a better place. They're the kind of people that they want to have in the King's Fund, right?
Yeah, I absolutely think it strengthens your application. My view is, though, that if you don't mention it, but you hit all of the person spec, it doesn't discount you either. It makes your application stand out for sure. Like, I'll think, oh God, like they know who we are, so they have a good understanding of what the organization does and our mission. So that is extra points to you. But if I got an application without that, it doesn't mean that you're discounted, that you're not going through. Quite often in our interviews, for example, we use that as like the introductory question to kind of just get people warmed up and get into the interview and get a sense of who they are as well. But yeah, I think they're kind of, it is nice to hear that, because it's also low-key a way to demonstrate that you've done your research into the organization, the service, and the role as well. And if you haven't already seen it in the chat, I can see that William posted a shortened version of that last paragraph of supporting statement 2. So bunged that into Chat GPT and asked it to shorten it.
Yes, obviously other AI tools are available, but yeah, to make it, using these tools is going to be important for all of our careers. So I would start using it for, why not use it for this? Obviously, don't write your whole thing in AI, but using it for these specific tasks where you're giving it, a very, very clear prompt. I need this to be less than 50 words, and then you can always add in stuff later. So if the statement calls for 150. Get it to drop it down to 100 and then add 50 more words of your own text, that you add in later. Those are kind of techniques that you can use. Wonderful.
I can see a comment that someone's put in the chat, which is quite an interesting point. So the first application is an example of a statement that someone sends off to several places. So they've not bothered to match it to the JD and spec. Any thoughts on copying and pasting of statements? Because applying for jobs is a time-consuming activity as well.
Can I just come in and say at this point, right? So I appreciate there'll be some people on the call that don't do a lot of literature searching, but when you do medical literature searching, you divide your search into blocks where you're searching for search terms. And what I would recommend is that a lot of these person specs are the same. So you can have a block for how you are proactive or how you are, in our one, we have ability to use initiative. So you can have one block of text as an example for how you use your initiative that you can reuse on any application that asks for initiative skills. And so then you can mix and match these blocks and keep a little repository. Well, after all, we are librarians, of these little blocks of text that you use for different person spec questions. But I still think you need to tailor it, even if you can copy and paste some elements of it. You shouldn't be pasting the whole thing.
Yeah, I agree. Don't make the mistake that somebody made a little while ago on an application I got, where they'd obviously copied and pasted it over, and the very first paragraph was something like, I think I would be ideally suited for the role of library assistant at Goldsmiths University because and it was like, well, that's very good, but this is actually LSE. So it kind of immediately became obvious what they'd done. So 100%, it's really difficult. You have to write these really long supporting statements and application forms. copy and paste, but read it over. Be careful is all I'll say. I should also mention that unfortunately my laptop, I could not find a spare cable and my laptop is kind of dying, so I may drop out. I'm really sorry, guys. I ended up getting waylaid by IT this morning. I didn't have time to charge it.
We'll have you as long as your laptop allows you to stay on. But yes, I agree. It's not uncommon for me to see applications where the name of the organization is not the organization that you've applied for. So I completely agree. Do recycle, reuse. Like that's the world we live in now. But do also, yeah, proofread and make sure that you're doing it sort of meaningfully. So, you know, not just I've already written a statement, so I'll just kind of reuse it for every application that I'm doing for a library assistant role, for example. You know, they do be cognizant that they are all asking for slightly different things and you need to tailor it. I'm just wondering if anyone has any specific questions about any aspects of shortlisting that they're curious about, or what shortlisters are looking for. If you do, put your hands up. In the meantime, oh, yeah, thanks, William. Is there anything that we haven't mentioned yet, panelists, that we think are kind of really important things for applicants to bear in mind?
We did speak about in the planning stages for this, that how we've been saying a lot of sort of negative things, but maybe we could end with something a bit positive, which is that we, as shortlisters, and we want someone to get the job.
We really do.
So we really, really want someone to get the job. So we are, you know, really, really looking for, we're not trying to kind of catch you out, but we just have limited time, and making our lives easier is obviously going to make sure that your application stands out. But ultimately, we want to recruit someone at the end of this, and we want to take 6-8 people forward to interview. So we're really looking to find those 6 and 8. So don't see it as like we're trying to weed people out. We're actually trying to find the best 6 or 8. And in terms of how that works in practice, what we're doing is we're sifting through and trying to get rid or trying to find the 6 and 8 that are actually going to be taken forward. We're actually trying to get rid of those copy-pasted applications and those low-effort applications, and we're trying to find the ones where they've put some effort in, and then we're picking from those. And even if we have 100 applications, maybe you're only really competing with 20 other people maximum, because of those 180 will be low effort applications. So it's all about how you kind of, beat those other 19 people, not necessarily all the other 100. So don't be too put off by that.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, we're always hoping to kind of see as many good applicants as possible. So yeah, it's not a case of us trying to kind of trip you up at any stage of the recruitment process, whether it's application or interview. What we want someone really great to join the team and make us better and enhance what we do. So if you're able to kind of bring that through in your application, then all the better. I think there's one thing as well which is important. So we talked a lot about like the essential and desirable criteria. There's something about like, if you don't feel like you meet it all, I don't think that should discount you from applying for a role. So there is like much quoted thing about how like men will quite often apply for roles if they meet less of the job description than women will. I'm not sure how true that is, but I think there is some truth in the fact that, like, I don't think you're necessarily going to get a lot like someone who will meet everything. But as a recruiter, there are some things that are like a priority for you, and you've indicated that in the essential. And whether you've got experience of it or not, there's also something about like, how quick are you at picking stuff up? Or is there something that you've done which is kind of a bit analogous to that skill that you feel like you could build on? If so, say that. So I think there is something about like, you know, don't talk yourself out of applying for something if it really interests you and you think you can grow in that role. And I can see that someone's also asked something about the kinds of questions asked in interview. William, you've already kind of commented on this. So in terms of what sort of questions might be asked in an interview, do they usually derive from the person's spec or job description? For my part, what I'll add is that they do, but you know, we try and ask slightly different stuff at interview to kind of flesh you out a bit more as person. Like to take you from like the two-dimensional person that we see on paper in your application to the person that we meet in the room, whether it's virtual or physical. So I would say that the stuff that we tend to ask at interview is a bit more like, how do you work? How do you work within a team? What is your working preference? That kind of thing. How do your values align with our organization and with our culture? That kind of stuff is stuff that we kind of tend to test at interview. My kind of, what I would say is, by the time you get to interview, I'm kind of fairly confident that you've all got the experience and skills that we've asked for. So it's not necessarily about proving that really at that point. But I don't know, William and Alyssa, if there's anything else you want to add to
that. Well, absolutely. At UCL, the interview questions have to be based on the person spec. If it doesn't say in the person spec, we can't ask it in interview. So it should be on there. So you shouldn't really have too many surprises. But obviously, I'm only speaking for UCL. At the NHS, there was a bit of room for different questions at the interview. But the question at the end, specifically about regurgitating answers, yeah, basically that still stands. Just keep telling us, because we don't know, like necessarily at UCL, we don't know which, you know, we don't always remember, I guess, which application goes with which person sitting in front of us. Just keep telling us until till we can't forget you. You know, just but obviously that's more of an interview skill thing. But yeah, so you know, don't be afraid to kind of repeat something that you've put in the interview in the application. But yeah, Hong An's absolutely right. To get an interview, you're already like potentially able to do the job. So at the interview, it's slightly different. We're instead thinking about, you know, a bit more about you rather than can you just do the job. So it's more important to. But there's another session. Do you want to advertise the other session?
Yeah. So the next session in this series will be focused on interview skills, which is, you know, related but slightly different because what we're testing at interview is also slightly different. So do keep an eye out for it on the website. We should be announcing the date of that soon. It will be next month, so it'll be in August. Let's take one more question. Jonathan, you had your hand up.
Hiya. It's actually very timely because that was actually going to be my question: is are you going to run a session on interviews?
Yes.
Because I've pretty much done a lot of job applications and sort of familiar with the style process and also a lot of information assistant posts, which are sort of like the person spec in the example you gave, are quite generic, like ability to use initiative, customer service, stuff like that. But my experience, and I'm trying to play the numbers by applying for as many senior information assistant posts as possible, is I'm quite happy I've learned a lot by applying to 2 or 3 and having the interview for 2 or 3 different senior information assistant posts, but I really fell on my face so many times. But, you know, I've learned a lot. And actually, just to say that for these senior ones, the questions get a lot more specific. So like the most recent interview I went for as a senior information assistant at a secondment post, I had prepared all these generic examples of like for the interview, and every single question that came up was so specific. It was within the e-access team, you know, and I was really unprepared for the whole thing. Yeah, I really learned a lot from that. So just to say, you know, for information system posts, they're much more generic, they're person specs. And once you start moving up or you want to progress, you really need to know what you're getting into. But like I said, I didn't have all the skills to do the senior information assistant e-access post at all. And I applied for it anyway, and I went to the interview and had great feedback as well, and actually was advised to make a record of all the questions I was asked in them, because it comes up again. If another e-access post comes up, they're pretty much going to ask the same questions again. I mean, it's a bit of a cold truth, but yeah.
Yeah. And I think you've hit upon something as well, which is like, you know, unlike with applications, interviews are a chance where you can ask for feedback and you can like get that direct feedback about, you know, like where you're strong and where you could develop and build upon your skills. I think this is a good time also to mention EARLL's mock interview scheme. So Alyssa, do you want to kind of talk a little bit about the offer?
Yeah, sure. So basically at EARLL we have the option to for people who want to do a mock interview. This is, I think, also where we drew the personal specs from that we worked with to date. So yeah, if anyone wants to now go to the next step and actually try an interview, feel free to reach out to us and we can make that happen.
And that's like regardless of what sector it's for, so it doesn't have to be like health, right? So
yeah, exactly. That is, I mean, EARLL is specifically for academic and research libraries, but yeah, generally speaking, open to anyone who's interested.
Brilliant. What a great offer that is. So yeah, do contact EARLL if you want a mock interview. And I guess it's not even necessarily if you've got a job interview in your future, if this is just you want to kind of brush up on your interview skills in general as well. Or get a sense of like what you might be asked in a particular kind of sector at interview. So yeah, Jonathan, kind of speaking to that kind of point that you made about, you know, like particular themes or questions or skills coming up at particular interviews. If there is something that you're kind of particularly interested in, it feels like the EARLL mock interview scheme is a good way to kind of get that sense in something which isn't a real world setting as well. Okay, well, thank you everyone so much. I hope that this has been a useful session. What we'll do afterwards is we'll circulate the recording, but we've also got like a kind of one slide tips and tricks thing, which are kind of like the things that, you know, if you're applying and you want to kind of bear this stuff in mind, this is the stuff that we think is kind of really key. So we'll also send that round to you all as well. Otherwise, we really appreciate you all coming along, and we hope you found it useful. Is there anything else to add, William and Alyssa?
No, just thank you. I found this really helpful as well. So yeah, William.
Good luck. Good luck with your applications.